A billionaire haunted by the past. A mysterious girl at a grave. One sentence that changes everything. Hello, beautiful souls. Before we dive into Lucas's extraordinary journey, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And hey, how are you doing today? If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button because you don't want to miss stories like this one. Trust me, what you're about to discover will leave you breathless. Now, let's begin. The iron cemetery gates groaned as Lucas Harrington pushed them open, and the sound clawed straight through his chest. 10 years. 10 years since he'd stood on this hillside. 10 years since he'd let guilt become a wall between him and the woman who'd loved him when he had nothing. The November wind bit through his $1,000 coat like it was paper. Lucas welcomed the cold. He deserved worse. The gravel path crunched beneath his Italian leather shoes, shoes that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Eleanor would have hated them. She'd always said he looked best in his worn-out sneakers, the ones he'd worn when they were young and broke and stupid with hope. His hands trembled as he clutched the bouquet of white roses. Her favorites. Though buying them now felt like the weakest, most pathetic apology in history. I'm sorry I chose the business over you. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry you died alone. The headstone came into view, simple gray marble, exactly as he'd ordered when he could barely see through his tears to sign the papers. Eleanor Grace Harrington. Beloved wife. 1982 to 2014. But Lucas stopped dead in his tracks. Someone was already there. A girl, no, a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, knelt before Eleanor's grave. Her clothes were threadbare, a faded jacket with a torn sleeve, jeans with mud-stained knees. Her dark hair hung in a simple braid down her back, and her hands, reddened from cold, gently placed a small bundle of wild daisies against the marble. Wild daisies. Eleanor's actual favorites. The ones she'd picked from fields during their road trips, laughing as she tucked them behind her ear. Not the expensive roses Lucas had brought, the ones he'd had his assistant order because he couldn't remember anymore, because he'd been too busy building his empire to remember his own wife's favorite flowers. The girl hadn't noticed him. She was whispering something, her voice so soft it blended with the wind. Lucas felt like an intruder. He should leave. Come back another time. But his feet wouldn't move. Then, as if sensing his presence, the girl turned. Her eyes were striking, deep brown, rimmed with exhaustion and something else. Grief, maybe, or gratitude. Her face was gaunt, like she hadn't eaten properly in days, but there was a strength in her gaze that reminded him of no. He couldn't let himself think it. I'm sorry, Lucas said, his voice rougher than intended. I didn't mean to interrupt. The girl stood quickly, wiping her hands on her jeans. She looked frightened for a moment, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. But then her expression softened. You're Lucas, she said. Not a question. A statement. He blinked. How do you? I've seen your pictures. In the articles. Her voice was quiet but steady. You built Harrington Technologies. You're her husband. The word pierced him. Husband. Past tense now, but the title still felt too big for what he'd actually been. He'd been a husband in name, sure. But in those final years? He'd been a ghost in his own marriage, haunted by spreadsheets and board meetings and the relentless hunger for more. Who are you? Lucas asked softly, stepping closer. Why are you here? The girl's eyes glistened. She looked down at the daisies, then back at him. My name is Sophie Dawson, she said, her voice trembling now. And I'm here because... She took a shaky breath. My mother told me this was the woman who saved my life. The world tilted. Lucas stared at her, at this stranger kneeling at his wife's grave, claiming a connection he couldn't fathom. His mind raced through possibilities, memories, desperately searching for any mention of a Sophie, any secret Eleanor might have kept. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. What are you talking about? The words came out sharper than he intended. I don't understand. How could Eleanor have? She gave my mother money, Sophie interrupted, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. 10 years ago, when I was sick, when we had nothing and nowhere to turn, she paid for everything. The surgery, the hospital, the medications. My mother said an angel named Eleanor Harrington walked into that hospital and saved me. And then, Sophie's voice broke. And then she disappeared. We never saw her again. 10 years ago, the year Eleanor died. Lucas's roses slipped from his numb fingers, scattering across the ground like white ghosts. What had Eleanor done? What secret had she carried to her grave, literally to her grave, and why was this stranger the one telling him about it? What else didn't he know about the woman he thought he'd lost? Lucas couldn't breathe. The cemetery suddenly felt too small, too close, like the earth itself was pressing down on his chest. He stared at Sophie Dawson, this stranger who just detonated a bomb in the middle of his carefully controlled grief. That's impossible, he whispered. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't. Eleanor had always been capable of grand gestures, of quiet heroism he'd been too blind to see. Sophie wiped her tears with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across her cheek. I know how it sounds. I know you probably think I'm crazy, or lying, or trying to get something from you. But I swear, I don't think that. Lucas surprised himself with the words. But looking at her, at the worn jacket, the genuine anguish in her eyes, the wild daisies she'd brought with hands that clearly knew hard work, he saw only truth. I don't understand. Eleanor never mentioned. His voice cracked. She never told me. Of course she hadn't. By 10 years ago, they'd barely been speaking. He'd been in Singapore closing a deal when she'd called about some charity event. He'd cut her off mid-sentence, told her to handle it herself, promised he'd be home soon. He never made it home in time. Sophie shifted her weight, uncertain. Maybe she was going to. Maybe she trailed off, seeming to realize she was offering comfort to a man who had everything except the one thing that mattered. Lucas forced himself to focus, to push past the roaring in his ears, and actually see this young woman. She was shivering, from cold or emotion. He couldn't tell. Her boots had holes near the soles. The daisies she'd brought weren't from a florist. She'd picked them herself, probably from some roadside patch. She'd come here with nothing, to honor a woman who'd saved her life. And he'd stayed away for a decade because facing his failure hurt too much. Tell me everything, Lucas said, his voice steadier now. Please. I need to know what happened. Sophie glanced at the grave, then back at him. Could we maybe sit? I've been on my feet since 5 this morning. Guilt stabbed through him again. Here he was, a billionaire, and he'd kept this girl standing in the cold while his world crumbled. Yes. Of course. There's a bench near the entrance, or he stopped, making a decision. Actually, my car has heat. We can talk there. Suspicion flickered across her face, quick and practiced. The look of someone who'd learned not to trust easy offers from wealthy men. I'm not trying to. Lucas held up his hands. I just want to hear about my wife. About what she did for you. That's all. Sophie studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. Okay, but just for a few minutes. I have to get back to work. They walked in silence through the cemetery. Lucas's mind churned with questions, memories, regrets. He'd built a tech empire worth $8 billion. He'd revolutionized cloud security. He'd been on the cover of Forbes 3 times. And he hadn't known his own wife was out there saving lives. The black Mercedes was parked just outside the gates, sleek, expensive, everything Lucas had thought mattered. His driver, Richard, straightened when he saw them approaching, his professional mask slipping for just a second as he took in Sophie's appearance. It's fine, Richard, Lucas said. Take a break. We'll be a while. Richard nodded and walked toward the small cafe across the street. Lucas opened the back door for Sophie. She hesitated again before sliding in, her eyes widening slightly at the cream leather interior. He walked around and got in from the other side, immediately turning up the heat. Thank you, Sophie murmured, holding her reddened hands up to the vents. When did you eat last? The question came out before Lucas could stop it. Sophie's jaw tightened.
Alla fine.
That's not what I asked. Yesterday. Lunch. She met his gaze defiantly, daring him to pity her. Lucas recognized that look. He'd worn it himself once, 25 years ago, when he'd been a broke college dropout with nothing but an idea and enough pride to choke on. Before Eleanor had believed in him. Before she'd convinced him that accepting help wasn't weakness. There's a restaurant nearby, he said carefully. After we talk, let me buy you dinner. It's the least I can do for someone who honors my wife's memory better than I have. Sophie's defiance crumbled, just slightly. You came today. 10 years too late. But you came. The simple words hit harder than any accusation could have. Lucas looked away, out the tinted window at the cemetery gates. Tell me about the surgery. What happened to you? Sophie took a shaky breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone recounting a nightmare survived. I was 9. We just moved to the city, my mom and me. She was working 2 jobs, barely keeping us afloat. Then I started getting sick. Really sick. Fainting, bleeding, exhausted all the time.
She paused.
Leukemia. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Lucas's stomach dropped. We had no insurance, Sophie continued, her words measured, like she'd told this story before but it still cost her. The treatments were? God, they were so expensive. My mother begged every charity, every program. We got on some waiting lists, got some assistance, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. The doctors said without aggressive treatment, I had maybe 6 months. She turned to look directly at him, and Lucas saw the 9-year-old she'd been in her eyes, terrified, hurting, watching her mother break apart trying to save her. My mother was at the hospital, crying in the chapel, when your wife found her. Lucas's throat constricted. Eleanor sat down next to her, asked what was wrong. And my mother, she was so desperate. She told this stranger everything.
About me.
About the bills. About how she was going to lose me. Sophie's voice wavered. Eleanor listened to the whole thing. Then she took my mother's hand and said, You're not going to lose your daughter. I promise you. A tear slid down Lucas's cheek. He didn't bother wiping it away. 2 days later, the hospital called. Someone had paid for everything. The full treatment plan. Months of chemotherapy. All the medications. Even a fund for our rent and food while my mother took time off to care for me. Sophie's own tears returned. The administrator said a woman named Lucas Harrington had made an anonymous donation, but she'd left a note asking that they tell my mother her daughter would be okay now. Lucas pressed his palm against his mouth, trying to hold back the sob building in his chest. This was Eleanor. This was exactly who she'd been. Generous, compassionate, seeing someone in pain and refusing to look away. All the qualities he'd fallen in love with, before he'd gotten too busy to notice them anymore. My mother tried to find her, Sophie said, to thank her, but Eleanor had already left. We searched for months, but your wife, she'd made sure we couldn't track her down. Like she didn't want gratitude. She just wanted to help. That sounds like her, Lucas managed. Sophie reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, its edges soft from handling. She held it out to Lucas. He took it with trembling fingers. The photo showed a woman in her late 30s, Sophie's mother, presumably, kneeling beside a small hospital bed. In that bed, a bald, painfully thin little girl smiled at the camera, her eyes bright despite the 4 in her arm. But it was the third person in the photo that shattered him. Standing beside the bed, one hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder, was Eleanor. His Eleanor. Her auburn hair pulled back in the simple ponytail she always wore. Her green eyes warm and kind. That smile, the one he hadn't seen in years before she died, the one she'd saved for moments of pure joy. We didn't know who she was until after, Sophie explained. A nurse took that picture. It was the only time we ever saw Eleanor in person. She'd come to check on me, the nurse said, to make sure I was okay. But she left before my mom got back from the cafeteria. Lucas couldn't take his eyes off the photograph. Couldn't stop seeing his wife's hand on this child's shoulder. This child she'd saved. This secret act of love she'd never shared with him. Because by then, he hadn't been someone she could share things with anymore. Mr. Harrington? Sophie's voice was gentle. Are you okay? He wasn't. He would never be okay again. But he was also something else, something he hadn't expected. He was grateful. When did your mother tell you about this? He asked. Sophie's face fell. 3 months ago, right before she died. And there it was, the grief he'd recognized in her eyes at the graveside. She'd lost her mother. She was alone just like him. I'm so sorry, Lucas said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Cancer, Sophie said flatly. Breast cancer. By the time they caught it, it was stage 4. She lasted 8 months after diagnosis. Her voice hardened with bitter irony. All those years we spent fighting my leukemia, and she's the one who... She couldn't finish. Lucas understood. Survival guilt. He knew that beast intimately. Before she died, she made me promise I'd find Eleanor's grave. That I'd bring flowers and say thank you, because we never got to while she was alive. Sophie looked out the window at the cemetery. So I've been coming here every week, bringing daisies, telling her about my life, about how her gift gave me 15 more years with my mom, hoping somehow she knows we never forgot her. Every week. This girl with holes in her boots had been visiting Eleanor's grave every week, while Lucas, who had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, had stayed away, wallowing in guilt and regret. What kind of man had he become? More importantly, what kind of man was he going to be now? If you're feeling this story, drop a comment and let me know what you think Lucas should do next. And if you're loving these powerful stories of redemption and hope, make sure you're subscribed. We're just getting started. Lucas made his decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Where are you working? He asked. Sophie blinked at the sudden question. What? You said you had to get back to work. Where? She hesitated, that wariness creeping back into her eyes. Why? Because I want to help you. The words came out raw, urgent. My wife saved your life and I didn't even know. I can't bring her back, and I can't undo the fact that I wasn't there when she needed me. But you're here. You're real. And if Eleanor thought you were worth saving then, I'm not a charity case. Sophie's voice turned sharp, defensive. I didn't come here for your money. I came to honor her memory. I know that. Lucas leaned forward, willing her to understand. But let me ask you something. If Eleanor were alive right now, and she knew you were struggling, what would she do? Sophie's jaw worked. She looked away. She'd help you, Lucas continued softly. You know she would. She didn't save your life just so you could barely survive it. You don't know anything about my life. Then tell me. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Outside, the November sky was darkening, heavy clouds rolling in with the promise of rain. Lucas could see Sophie's reflection in the window, the tight set of her shoulders, the way her hands clenched in her lap. Finally, she spoke. I work at a diner. Pete's Place, on 5th and Morrison. Breakfast and lunch shifts, 6 days a week. Her voice was hollow, reciting facts. I also clean offices at night, 3 buildings in the financial district. And on Sundays, I walk dogs for people in the Heights.
3 jobs.
She was working 3 jobs. Where do you live? A studio apartment in Riverside. Rent's cheap because the building's falling apart, but it's mine. She said it with a defiance that broke his heart. I pay my own way. What about school? College? Sophie laughed, but there was no humor in it. I had a scholarship. Full ride to State University. I was going to study nursing. Past tense. But when my mom got sick, I had to drop out. Take care of her. Pay the medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover. She finally turned to look at him. Sound familiar?
It did.
The cruel irony wasn't lost on Lucas. Eleanor had saved Sophie from medical debt as a child, only for different medical debt to destroy her future as an adult. You could go back, Lucas said. I could.
No.
Sophie cut him off. I told you I'm not. Sophie Dawson? The voice came from outside the car, sharp and authoritative. Lucas turned to see a man in a cheap suit standing near the driver's side, his hand already pulling out a badge. Sheriff's deputy. Sophie went white. Oh, God. The deputy tapped on the window. Lucas pressed the button to lower it, confusion and alarm spiking through him. Can I help you, officer? Lucas kept his voice even. The deputy ignored him, focusing on Sophie. Ms. Dawson, I need you to step out of the vehicle. What's this about? Lucas demanded. Sir, this doesn't concern you. The deputy's hand moved to rest on his belt, near his handcuffs. Ms. Dawson now, please. Sophie was trembling. I can explain. I just needed more time. You had time. 3 months and 4 warnings. The deputy opened the door. You're going to need to come with me. Lucas's mind raced.
Hold on.
What is she being charged with? The deputy finally looked at him, his expression hard. Theft. Ms. Dawson here has been stealing from her employer. Pete Castellano filed an official complaint this morning. That's a lie. Sophie's voice cracked. I never stole anything. Pete says $1,500 is missing from the register over the past 2 weeks. Says he has you on camera. He's lying. I never. Sophie's eyes were wild now, panicked. I was short one time, and I told him I'd pay it back. It was $60, not $1,500, and it was a mistake with the till. You can explain it at the station. The deputy reached for her arm. Lucas moved without thinking, stepping out of the car and placing himself between Sophie and the deputy. Wait. Just wait 1 second. Sir, step aside. My name is Lucas Harrington. He said it calmly but with the weight of someone used to being listened to. I'm sure you've heard of me. Before you arrest this young woman, I'm telling you right now that I will personally hire the best legal team in the state to defend her. And I will also be looking very carefully into Pete Castellano's accusations. The deputy faltered. Mr. Harrington, I have a warrant.
Do you?
Or, do you have a complaint from a man who might have other reasons for wanting this young woman gone? Sophie made a small sound behind him. Lucas glanced back and saw recognition dawning in her eyes, and with it, fear. Pete asked me out, she whispered. Last month. I said no. And then suddenly the drawer started being short, and he started accusing me of... Her voice broke. Oh God, he's setting me up. Everything clicked into place. A powerful enough accusation to ruin her. To make her desperate enough to accept his advances in exchange for dropping charges. Lucas had seen men like Pete Castellano before, small tyrants who abused what little power they had. The rage that swept through him was white-hot and righteous. She's not going anywhere, Lucas said, his voice like steel. Not until I've made some calls. The deputy shifted uncomfortably. Sir, I have to. Give me 2 hours. If I can't prove her innocence by then, I'll bring her to the station myself. You have my word. Mr. Harrington. 2 hours, deputy. Unless you'd like me to call the mayor? We play golf every Thursday. It was a power play, and Lucas hated using his influence this way. But for Sophie, for Eleanor's legacy, he'd use every weapon he had. The deputy's jaw tightened. Finally, he nodded. 2 hours. But if you don't show up, I'm issuing an arrest warrant. Understood. They watched the deputy walk back to his patrol car and drive away. Only when he was gone did Lucas allow himself to breathe. He turned to Sophie. She was staring at him like he'd just materialized from another dimension. Why did you do that? She whispered. Lucas thought of Eleanor. Of the photograph showing her hand on a sick child's shoulder. Of 10 years of guilt and absence and failure. Because, he said, it's what she would have done. And I'm done being the man who wasn't there. Lucas pulled out his phone, his mind already 3 steps ahead. Get in the car. We don't have much time. Sophie stood frozen on the sidewalk. Mr. Harrington, you don't have to. Lucas. Call me Lucas. He was already scrolling through his contacts. And yes, I do. Now get in before that deputy changes his mind. She obeyed, sliding back into the Mercedes just as the first drops of rain began to fall. Lucas followed, his phone already ringing. Harrington Technologies, Legal Department. The voice was crisp, professional. Amanda, it's Lucas. I need you to do something for me, and I need it done in the next 90 minutes. Sir, Amanda Chin had been his head of legal for 7 years. She knew when he was serious. There's a diner called Pete's Place on 5th and Morrison. Owner is Pete Castellano. He's filed theft charges against one of his employees, false charges.
I need you to find out everything about him.
Business licenses, tax records, employee complaints, health violations, anything that doesn't look right. On what grounds? He's framing an innocent woman because she rejected his advances. I want ammunition, Amanda. The kind that makes him drop charges and think twice about ever doing this again. There was a pause. I'll have something for you in an hour. 45 minutes. Done. Amanda hung up. Sophie was staring at him. You can't just. I can and I am. Lucas was already dialing another number. Richard? I need you back at the car. We're going to Pete's Place Diner. He ended the call and turned to Sophie. Does Pete have security cameras? Yes, but are they real cameras or just for show? Sophie blinked at the question. I don't know. The one in the back flickers a lot. Pete's always saying he needs to replace the system but never does. Lucas filed that information away. When did he say you stole from the register? Over the past 2 weeks. But I swear, Lucas, the only time money was short was last Thursday.
$60.
I counted the drawer 3 times, couldn't figure out where it went. I even offered to pay it back from my paycheck. And what did Pete say? Sophie's face flushed. He said we could work something out. That maybe I could come by his place after my shift, have a drink, talk about it. The disgust in her voice was palpable. I told him no. Told him I'd bring cash the next day to cover it. Did you?
Yes. $60 exact.
I put it in an envelope with a note and left it in his office. Her voice dropped, but when I came in for my next shift, he acted like I'd never given him anything. Said the money was still missing, and now the total was up to $200. Classic escalation. Pete had been testing her, seeing how far he could push before she broke. The envelope. Did anyone else see you leave it? Sophie thought hard. Maria, the other waitress. She was refilling napkin dispensers when I went into his office. Maria's last name? Valdez. Maria Valdez. Lucas made a note on his phone. Richard appeared at the driver's door, slightly out of breath from jogging back from the cafe. Within moments, they were pulling into traffic, windshield wipers beating against the steadily increasing rain. Sophie twisted her hands in her lap. Even if you prove I didn't steal, I've already lost the job. Pete's not going to take me back. You don't want to go back there. I need the money. That job pays my rent. Without it, I'll be evicted in 2 weeks. Her voice rose with panic. I can't lose my apartment. It's all I have left of. She cut herself off, but Lucas understood. All she had left of her mother. Of the life they'd built together. You won't lose anything, Lucas said firmly. I promise you. You can't promise that. You don't even know me. I know enough. He met her eyes. I know you visit a stranger's grave every week to honor a promise. I know you dropped out of college to care for your mother. I know you're working yourself to exhaustion trying to survive.
His voice softened.
And I know my wife saw something in you worth saving. That's all I need to know. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Why are you doing this? Because Eleanor would have. Because he'd spent 10 years running from his guilt and his grief, and this terrified young woman was offering him something he'd thought he'd lost forever, a chance to be the man Eleanor had believed he could be. But he couldn't say all that. Not yet. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. The diner came into view, a squat, grease-stained building with a flickering neon sign that read, P.E.'s PLC. 2 letters burn out. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few trucks and a rusted sedan. Lucas's phone buzzed. Amanda. That was fast, he answered. You're going to love this. Amanda's voice carried a sharp satisfaction. Pete Castellano has 3 health code violations in the past year. 2 formal complaints from former employees alleging harassment, both settled out of court with NDAs. And here's the interesting part. His books don't add up. I pulled his tax returns. He's reporting income that doesn't match his credit card receipts. He's skimming. Or laundering. Either way, he's playing games with numbers. If someone were to report him to the IRS. Lucas smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Send me everything you have. And Amanda? Draw up an employment contract. Full-time position, benefits, salary at, let's say, $60,000 to start. Sophie's head whipped toward him. What are you? For whom? Amanda asked. I'll send you the details. Just have it ready. He hung up and turned to Sophie. When we go in there, I need you to stay calm. Let me do the talking. Lucas, I can't let you. Yes, you can. He softened his tone.
Please.
Trust me. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the roof of the car. Sophie looked at the diner, then back at Lucas. Whatever she saw in his face made her nod slowly. Okay, she whispered. Okay. They stepped out into the rain. Lucas's expensive coat was immediately soaked, but he didn't care. Sophie pulled her thin jacket tighter, and he made a mental note to get her a proper one. A warm one. The diner's door chimed as they entered. The smell hit Lucas immediately. Burnt coffee, old grease, desperation. A handful of customers looked up briefly before returning to their meals. Behind the counter, a heavy-set man in his 50s was wiping down the coffee station.
Pete Castellano.
Lucas recognized the type instantly. The self-satisfied smirk, the way his eyes slid over Sophie's body before landing on Lucas with suspicion. We're closed too. Pete stopped, recognition dawning.
Sophie.
You've got some nerve showing up here. Mr. Castellano, Lucas said smoothly, stepping forward. My name is Lucas Harrington. I believe we need to have a conversation about the accusations you've made against Ms. Dawson. Pete's eyes narrowed. This is a private matter. It stopped being private when you involved law enforcement. Lucas pulled out his phone, swiped to Amanda's email, and began reading. 3 health code violations. 2 harassment settlements. And some very interesting discrepancies in your tax filings that I'm sure the IRS would love to examine. The color drained from Pete's face. You can't. I can. I have. The question is, what happens next? Lucas took a step closer. You're going to drop the charges against Sophie. You're going to pay her everything you owe her, plus severance. And you're going to provide a letter of recommendation stating she was an exemplary employee. Like hell I will. Lucas smiled. Or I make one phone call, and by tomorrow morning, you'll have inspectors crawling over every inch of this place. IRS. Health Department. Labor Board. I wonder what they'll find. Pete's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Lucas thought the man might actually throw a punch. He almost hoped he would. But Pete was a bully, and bullies backed down when confronted with real power.
Fine, he spat.
Take her. She's a lousy waitress anyway. Sophie flinched. Lucas felt his rage spike, but he kept his voice level. The letter of recommendation. And her final paycheck.
Now.
20 minutes later, they were back in the Mercedes. Sophie held an envelope containing 2 weeks' pay and a grudging letter of recommendation. The theft charges would be officially dropped by end of business. She stared at the envelope like it might disappear. I can't believe you just did that. Believe it, Lucas said. But his mind was already racing ahead, to the contract Amanda was drawing up, to the questions still unanswered about Eleanor's secret charity, to the mystery of why his wife had hidden so much from him, and what else he might discover if he kept digging. Lucas. Sophie's voice was small. What happens now? He looked at this young woman Eleanor had saved, this stranger who'd become a lifeline he hadn't known he needed. Now, he said, we figure out the truth. About Eleanor. About what she was really doing in those final years. And about why she'd kept the best parts of herself hidden from the man who was supposed to know her best. Lucas took Sophie to a restaurant in the Heights, the kind of place where a single appetizer cost more than her daily wages. She'd protested, of course, but he'd insisted. Now she sat across from him, still wearing her damp jacket, looking profoundly uncomfortable surrounded by crystal and linen. Order anything you want, Lucas said gently. Sophie stared at the menu like it was written in a foreign language, which, given the French descriptions, it partly was. Lucas, this is too much. It's dinner. Just dinner.
He paused.
When did you eat last? And don't lie this time. Her shoulders sagged. Yesterday. Breakfast. 36 hours. She hadn't eaten in 36 hours. Lucas signaled the waiter and ordered half the menu: appetizers, entrees, sides. When the waiter left, Sophie was looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and something else. Shame, maybe. You don't have to be embarrassed, Lucas said quietly. I know what it's like to be hungry.
Now.
But 25 years ago, I was living in a basement apartment with no heat, eating ramen for every meal, trying to build a company from nothing. The memories were old, but still sharp. Eleanor found me passed out at my keyboard one night. I'd been working for 30 hours straight, hadn't eaten in 2 days. She made me dinner, forced me to sleep, and then... His voice caught. And then she believed in me when no one else did. Sophie leaned forward. What happened to her, Lucas? How did she die? The question he'd been avoiding. The truth he'd spent 10 years running from. Car accident, he said flatly. She was driving home from the city. It was raining like tonight. A truck crossed the median and... He couldn't finish. I'm so sorry. She'd called me that morning. I was in Singapore, closing a deal worth $50 million. She said she needed to talk to me about something important. I told her I was busy. Told her we'd talk when I got home. Lucas stared at his water glass. I never made it home. By the time I landed, she was already gone. The food arrived, but Lucas couldn't look at it. The memory was too fresh, too raw, even after all these years. What did she want to talk to you about? Sophie asked softly. I don't know. I never found out. The guilt was a living thing in his chest. Maybe it was about you. About the charity work she was doing. Maybe she was finally going to tell me, and I... He pressed his palms against his eyes. I brushed her off. Like I'd brushed her off 100 times before. Sophie reached across the table and touched his hand. The gesture was simple, but it steadied him. She saved my life, Sophie said. That's what matters. And she loved you. I could see it in that photo. The nurse told my mother that Eleanor talked about her husband, about how brilliant and driven he was. She was proud of you. She shouldn't have been. Lucas pulled his hand back, the self-loathing too thick to accept comfort. I chose money over her. Every single time. Then don't make that choice again. Sophie's voice was firm. You asked me to trust you. Now I'm asking you to trust yourself. Be the man she believed in. Before Lucas could respond, his phone rang. Amanda. I found something, she said without preamble. You need to see this. What is it? Not over the phone. I'm sending a courier to your location. He'll be there in 10 minutes.
She paused.
Lucas, Eleanor had a safety deposit box. At First National. The bank contacted your office 6 months ago about unclaimed property, but it got buried in your assistant's files. I only found it when I was doing a deep dive on her estate records. Lucas's heart stopped. A safety deposit box? I closed all of her accounts. This one was in her maiden name, Eleanor Grace Whitmore. The bank's been holding it, waiting for next of kin to claim it. Eleanor's maiden name. Before she'd become a Harrington. Before she tied herself to him and his endless ambition. What's in it? Lucas whispered. That's what the courier is bringing. The bank finally released the contents to your legal team an hour ago. I had them scanned. Amanda's voice softened. Lucas, there are letters. A lot of letters. The line went dead. Lucas sat frozen, his mind reeling. Sophie was watching him with concern. What's wrong? Eleanor had a safety deposit box. One I didn't know about. He looked up at Sophie. There are letters inside. They barely touched their food. 10 minutes felt like 10 hours. When the courier finally arrived, Lucas's hands were shaking so badly he could barely sign for the package. Inside the envelope was a USB drive and a note from Amanda. Everything's on here.
Call me if you need anything.
Lucas pulled out his laptop. He never went anywhere without it and plugged in the drive. Sophie moved her chair closer so she could see the screen. The drive contained scanned documents.
Dozens of them.
Letters, receipts, photographs, journal entries. All in Eleanor's handwriting. Lucas clicked on a file labeled, "Read me first." Eleanor's words filled the screen. "My dearest Lucas, if you're reading this, then I'm gone.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry for leaving you, and I'm sorry for keeping secrets. But I need you to understand why. 2 years ago, I went to the doctor for what I thought was fatigue. They found a brain tumor. Inoperable. The doctors gave me 3 years, maybe 5 if I was lucky." Lucas stopped breathing. "I didn't tell you because you would have stopped everything, the company, the deals, your dreams, to take care of me. And I couldn't let you do that. Your work was too important, and I knew that if I became your focus, you'd resent me eventually. Maybe not consciously, but it would be there, a shadow over everything we'd built." "Oh my God," Sophie whispered. Lucas couldn't speak.
Couldn't think.
Eleanor had been dying. For 2 years before the accident, she'd been dying, and she'd never told him. "So I made a different choice," Eleanor's letter continued. "I took the money we'd made, my half of everything, and I started helping people. People who were hurting, who were desperate, who needed someone to believe in them the way I'd believed in you. I helped families pay medical bills. I funded scholarships. I paid off mortgages for people about to lose their homes. I did it anonymously because I didn't need recognition. I needed purpose. I needed to know that when I died, I'd left something good behind." Lucas scrolled down, his vision blurring with tears. "There are files on this drive. Names, photographs, stories. 43 families, Lucas. 43 lives I touched with the money we made together. Sophie Dawson was one of them. She was my last one, actually. By the time I met her mother, I was already getting sick from the tumor. I had about 6 months left," the doctor said. "I didn't plan for the accident. Didn't plan to leave you without answers. But if you found this, then maybe it's time you knew the truth. I loved you, Lucas. I never stopped. But I loved the man you were becoming less than the man you'd been. And I didn't know how to tell you that without breaking both our hearts. So I'm telling you now, don't let my death be the thing that defines you. Don't let guilt become your prison.
Live.
Help people. Be the man I fell in love with. And if you find the families on this drive, if you meet them and see what our money accomplished, maybe you'll understand why I kept the secret. I didn't save them for recognition. I saved them because I could. Now it's your turn. All my love, forever. Eleanor." The letter ended. Lucas sat back, his entire world shattered and reassembled in the span of 5 minutes. Eleanor had been dying. She'd known, for 2 years, that her time was limited. And instead of spending it demanding his attention, she'd spent it saving lives. 43 families. 43 Sophie Dawsons. He clicked on another file. Photographs appeared. Children in hospital beds, families standing in front of houses, scholarship recipients in graduation gowns. Each one labeled with a name and a brief note in Eleanor's handwriting. Timothy Chun. Age 7. Kidney transplant. Loves dinosaurs.
Maria Santos.
Age 52. Lost her home in the fire. Baker. Makes the most amazing tres leches cake. James Wright. Age 18. First in his family to go to college. Going to be a doctor. Story after story. Life after life. A secret legacy of compassion that Eleanor had built while Lucas had been too blind to notice. Sophie was crying openly now. She was incredible. Lucas couldn't speak. His throat was closed, his chest tight with grief and awe and a love so fierce it physically hurt. Eleanor had been dying, and she'd spent her final years giving life to others. And he'd been too busy making money to see the miracle happening right in front of him. Lucas. Sophie's voice broke through his spiral. Look at this file. She pointed to a document labeled Trust Fund. Lucas opened it. Legal paperwork. A trust established in Eleanor's name, funded with $3 million, everything she'd had left when she died. The trust was designated for continued charitable work in perpetuity, to be administered by. Lucas's breath caught. To be administered by Lucas Harrington, should he choose to accept the responsibility. At the bottom of the document, a final note from Eleanor. I'm betting on you, love. One last time. The weight of it crashed over him. The responsibility. The chance at redemption. The gift Eleanor had left him. Not money, but purpose. She trusted you, Sophie whispered. Even at the end. She trusted you to finish what she started. Lucas looked at this young woman sitting beside him, one of 43 miracles his wife had performed in secret. He thought of the trust fund, of the families still out there who didn't know Eleanor's name but carried her legacy. He thought of the man he'd been and the man he could still become. I need to find them, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion and determination. All of them. Every single person Eleanor helped. I need to know their stories. I need to. His phone rang again. An unknown number. Lucas answered. Hello. Mr. Harrington? The voice was male, older, uncertain. My name is David Chen. I saw your name in the news today, and I did some research, and I think your wife saved my son's life 15 years ago. Lucas's eyes went wide. He looked at Sophie, then at the screen showing Timothy Chen's photograph. Tell me everything, Lucas said. And as David Chen began to speak, Lucas realized that Eleanor's story and his own redemption was only just beginning. David Chen's story was the first of many. Over the next 3 days, Lucas barely slept. His penthouse became a command center. Laptops open on every surface, files spread across the dining table, a whiteboard covered in names and connections. Sophie had moved into the guest room, though Lucas suspected she spent as little time sleeping as he did. They were hunting miracles. Eleanor's miracles. By day 3, they'd found 17 of the 43 families. Each conversation was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Stories of lives saved, futures restored, hope given when there was none left. A single mother who'd kept her home. A teenager who'd gotten the surgery that let him walk again. A veteran who'd received PTSD treatment he couldn't afford. Eleanor's fingerprints were everywhere, invisible but undeniable. Lucas was documenting everything, preparing to reactivate the trust fund, to continue Eleanor's work. It felt right. It felt like finally, he was honoring her memory the way she deserved. Then everything fell apart. The email arrived at 11:47 p.m. on the third night. Lucas was half asleep on the couch, Sophie dozing in the armchair across from him, when his laptop chimed. The sender was listed as a friend. The subject line read, "You should stop digging." Lucas's exhaustion evaporated. He clicked open the email. Mr. Harrington, your wife's charitable work is admirable, but you're making a mistake by publicizing it. Some of the people Eleanor helped have moved on with their lives. They don't want reminders of their worst moments. They don't want a billionaire showing up with cameras and journalists, turning their private pain into public spectacle. More importantly, not everyone Eleanor helped was grateful. Some people resented the handout. Some felt pitted, demeaned. And some have secrets they'd rather stay buried. Stop now while you still can. Let the past remain past. Or face the consequences. Lucas stared at the screen, his blood running cold. Sophie, wake up. She jerked awake. What? What's wrong? He turned the laptop toward her. She read the email, her face going pale. Is this a threat? She whispered. I think so. Lucas's mind raced. But from who? And why?
His phone rang.
Another unknown number. Lucas answered, putting it on speaker. Mr. Harrington, this is Catherine Mills from the National Post. The journalist's voice was sharp, eager. I'm running a story tomorrow about your late wife's secret charity work. I have sources claiming that Eleanor Harrington's donations weren't as altruistic as they appeared, that some of the money came from questionable sources. I'm calling for comment. Lucas's stomach dropped. That's absurd. Eleanor's money was. I have bank records showing large cash deposits into her personal account in the months before her death. Deposits that don't match any legitimate source of income. I also have testimony from several recipients of her charity claiming they felt coerced into accepting help. That Eleanor used her money to manipulate vulnerable people. That's a lie. Sophie was on her feet now. Eleanor helped people because she cared. And who are you? Catherine's tone sharpened. Are you one of the recipients? Can I quote you? Lucas ended the call, his hands shaking. This doesn't make sense. Where would Eleanor get large cash deposits? Everything she had came from our joint accounts, from the company. His laptop chimed again. Another email. This one had an attachment. Lucas opened it with dread. The attachment was a scan of a bank statement. Eleanor's personal account, from 9 years ago. Just as Catherine had said, there were 3 large deposits, $50,000 each, marked simply as cash due. But it was the second attachment that destroyed him. A photograph. Eleanor, standing outside a building Lucas didn't recognize, accepting an envelope from a man in an expensive suit. The man's face was partially obscured, but his posture screamed wealth and power. The timestamp on the photo was dated 6 months before Eleanor died.
No, Lucas whispered.
No, this is wrong. Eleanor wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Sophie's voice was strained. Lucas, what are you thinking?
He couldn't say it.
Couldn't give voice to the poisonous thought taking root in his mind. That maybe Eleanor's charity hadn't been pure. That maybe she'd been involved in something darker. That maybe. His phone rang again. This time, he recognized the number. Amanda Chun, his head of legal. Lucas, we have a problem. Amanda's voice was tight with stress. The IRS just contacted me. They're opening an investigation into Eleanor's estate. Someone filed a complaint claiming she was involved in money laundering. The room tilted. Lucas gripped the edge of the table. That's impossible. I know that and you know that, but they have evidence. Bank records, photographs, testimony from anonymous sources. Lucas, if this goes public before we can disprove it, it'll destroy everything. Your company's stock will tank. Eleanor's reputation will be ruined. And the trust fund. Any judge will freeze those assets until the investigation concludes. How long? Could be months. Could be years.
Years.
The 43 families Eleanor had helped would wait years to see her legacy honored. The trust fund she'd established would sit frozen, useless, while lawyers and investigators picked apart her final gift. Who's doing this? Lucas demanded. Who would want to destroy Eleanor's memory? I don't know. But whoever it is, they're well-connected and well-funded. This isn't some amateur smear campaign. This is coordinated, professional, and... The line went dead. Lucas tried calling back. The call wouldn't connect. He tried his other contacts. Same result. Then the lights went out. The entire penthouse plunged into darkness. Emergency lighting flickered on after a moment, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Sophie grabbed his arm. Lucas, what's happening? I don't know. But fear was crawling up his spine, cold and visceral. Someone was targeting him, targeting Eleanor's legacy. And they were powerful enough to cut his communications, to kill the power to a secured building. His laptop screen glowed in the darkness. One final email from a friend. Last warning, Mr. Harrington. Walk away from Eleanor's charity work. Forget what you found. Go back to your company and your money and your guilt. Or I will destroy everything she built, everything she saved, and everyone she loved, including Sophie Dawson. Lucas's blood turned to ice. He looked at Sophie, saw the fear in her eyes, and knew with absolute certainty that this was real. The threat wasn't empty. Whoever was behind this had the means and the will to carry it out. We need to leave, he said. Right now. Lucas. They know about you. They mentioned you by name. You're not safe here. Sophie's face went white. But where do we? The emergency exit door at the end of the hallway burst open. 3 men in dark suits entered, their faces obscured by shadows. They moved with the practiced efficiency of professionals, security, military, or worse. Lucas pushed Sophie behind him.
Who are you?
What do you want? The lead man stopped 10 feet away. When he spoke, his voice was cold and empty of emotion. Mr. Harrington, you're going to come with us. Voluntarily, we hope. But one way or another, you're coming. On whose authority? People who are far more powerful than you. The man took a step forward. People who would rather Eleanor Harrington's secrets stay buried. People who will do whatever it takes to ensure that happens. Lucas's mind raced through options. The building had security, but the power was out. His phone wasn't working. They were trapped. Sophie's hand found his in the darkness, squeezing tight. And Lucas realized with crushing despair that in trying to honor Eleanor's legacy, he might have just signed both their death warrants. Everything Eleanor had built, every life she'd saved, every hope she'd restored, was about to be destroyed. And he was powerless to stop it. The lead man smiled. "Time's up, Mr. Harrington. What's it going to be?" Lucas's entire body tensed, ready to fight, ready to do anything to protect Sophie. But before he could move, a voice cut through the darkness. "Federal agents. Hands where I can see them." Blinding flashlights flooded the hallway. The three men in suits spun around as a team of agents in FBI vests swarmed through both exits. Within seconds, all three intruders were on the ground, hands zip-tied behind their backs. A woman in her 40s approached Lucas, her badge held high. "Special Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI. Are you hurt?" Lucas could barely process what was happening. "How did you? Your attorney, Amanda Chun, contacted us 40 minutes ago. She suspected something was wrong when your communications went dark." Torres signaled to her team, who were now securing the hallway. "Ms. Chun is very persuasive when she wants to be. She convinced us to take a look at the complaints against your wife's estate. We didn't like what we found." Sophie stepped out from behind Lucas, her voice shaking. "What do you mean?" Torres pulled out a tablet, showing them a series of photographs. "These men work for Victor Ashford. You know that name?" Lucas felt like he'd been punched. Victor Ashford. He was on the Harrington Technologies board of directors. 5 years ago, I removed him for embezzlement. That's right. And he's been waiting for his chance to get back at you ever since. Torres swiped to another image, the same man from the photograph with Eleanor. "We've been investigating Ashford for 2 years. Money laundering, fraud, conspiracy. But he's slippery. Until tonight." "I don't understand," Lucas said. "What does this have to do with Eleanor?" Torres's expression softened. "Your wife discovered Ashford's crimes. About 9 years ago, she was volunteering at a legal aid clinic. Did you know that?" Lucas's throat constricted.
No.
He hadn't known. Another piece of Eleanor's secret life. She helped a woman named Patricia Reynolds file a complaint against Ashford Industries. Patricia's husband had died in an industrial accident, and Ashford was hiding evidence to avoid a lawsuit. Torres pulled up another document. Eleanor gathered the evidence, documented everything, and helped Patricia win a settlement. A big one. Sophie gasped. The cash deposits in Eleanor's account were Patricia's way of saying thank you. She insisted on giving Eleanor a percentage of the settlement, even though Eleanor refused multiple times. Eventually, Eleanor accepted the money, but only so she could donate it to other people in need. Lucas's legs nearly gave out. Relief and grief crashed over him in equal measure. Eleanor hadn't been involved in anything criminal. She'd been fighting corruption, helping the powerless, being exactly who she'd always been. "Ashford's been planning this revenge for years," Torres continued. "When he heard you were investigating Eleanor's charitable work, he saw his opportunity. Discredit her, freeze the trust fund, destroy your reputation. He fabricated evidence, paid off witnesses, even hired these men to intimidate you." "The journalist," Lucas said. "Catherine Mills. Being fed false information by Ashford's people. We've already contacted her editor. The story won't run." Torres looked him square in the eye. "Mr. Harrington, your wife was a hero. She exposed a criminal, helped dozens of people, and never asked for recognition. Ashford tried to destroy that legacy, but he failed." Lucas felt something crack open in his chest, a dam breaking after 10 years. Eleanor hadn't just been saving lives with money. She'd been fighting for justice, standing up to powerful men like Ashford, being brave in ways Lucas had never imagined. And he'd been halfway around the world, oblivious to all of it. Where is Ashford now?
Sophie asked.
We arrested him 20 minutes ago, along with 4 of his associates. Torres smiled grimly. He's going away for a long time. And the evidence we collected tonight, the threats, the intimidation, the attempted assault, that's just icing on the cake. The power flickered back on. The normal lights of Lucas's penthouse blazed to life, banishing the red emergency glow. It felt symbolic somehow, darkness retreating, truth emerging. Torres handed Lucas her card. You'll need to give a formal statement tomorrow. But for tonight, you're safe. Both of you. She glanced at Sophie, then back at Lucas. Your wife would be proud of what you're doing, honoring her legacy. Don't let tonight stop you. The FBI agents left, taking their prisoners with them. Within minutes, the penthouse was quiet again, just Lucas and Sophie standing in the hallway, both trembling with adrenaline and relief. Sophie spoke first. I thought we were going to die.
So did I.
Lucas ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. Eleanor stood up to Ashford. She fought him, exposed him, and he spent years wanting revenge. She was braver than either of us knew. Lucas looked at Sophie, this young woman who'd stumbled into his life 3 days ago and changed everything. She'd been terrified tonight, threatened by dangerous men, but she hadn't run. She'd stayed by his side, just like Eleanor would have. I need to tell you something, Lucas said. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere honest. When those men showed up, all I could think about was protecting you. Not the company, not my reputation, not even Eleanor's legacy. Just you. Sophie's eyes widened. Lucas. I know we barely know each other. I know this whole situation is insane. But you've reminded me of something I forgot. What it feels like to care about someone more than success, more than money, more than anything. His voice cracked. Eleanor saw something worth saving in you. And now I see it too. Tears spilled down Sophie's cheeks. You saved me tonight. You stood between me and those men without hesitation. Because it was the right thing to do.
No.
Sophie stepped closer. Because you're a good man, Lucas. You made mistakes with Eleanor. You've admitted that. But you're trying to be better. You're honoring her legacy, helping people, fighting for what's right. That's who you are. Lucas felt something shift inside him, a weight lifting, a prison door opening. For 10 years, he'd carried guilt like armor, letting it define him, using it as an excuse to hide from life. But Sophie was right. Eleanor wouldn't want him frozen in regret. She'd want him living, fighting, loving. Tomorrow, Lucas said, his voice steady with newfound purpose, we're going to restart Eleanor's trust fund. We're going to find all 43 families and make sure they know what she did for them. We're going to turn her secret legacy into a public foundation that helps thousands more.
We.
Sophie smiled through her tears. I can't do this alone. I need someone who understands what Eleanor's charity really meant. Someone who benefited from her kindness and can speak to it with authenticity.
He paused.
I need you, Sophie. If you'll stay. Sophie didn't hesitate.
Yes.
Absolutely yes. Lucas pulled out his phone, service restored now, and sent a message to Amanda. Ashford's arrested. We're safe. And we're moving forward with the foundation. Full speed ahead. Amanda's response was immediate, about damn time. I'll have the paperwork ready by morning. Lucas looked at Sophie, and for the first time in 10 years, he felt something other than grief and guilt. He felt hope. Eleanor's legacy wasn't buried with her. It was alive, growing, waiting for him to nurture it. And he finally had the courage to try. There's one more thing, Sophie said quietly. She pulled out her phone and showed him a photograph, the one of Eleanor at her hospital bedside all those years ago. But this time, Lucas didn't just see his wife's kindness. He saw her strength, her conviction, her willingness to fight for what mattered, even when it cost her. Especially when it cost her. She left you a map, Sophie said. 43 miracles. 43 chances to be the man she believed you could be. Lucas nodded, determination flooding through him. Then, that's exactly who I'm going to become. The darkness had tried to destroy them, but they'd survived. And now, together, they were going to shine a light so bright that Eleanor's legacy would never be forgotten. 3 months later, Lucas stood backstage at the grand ballroom of the Rothschild Hotel, adjusting his tie for the 4th time. Through the curtain, he could hear the murmur of 500 guests, journalists, philanthropists, politicians, and most importantly, Eleanor's families. All 43 of them. Sophie appeared beside him, looking stunning in a simple navy dress, paid for by her new salary as Director of Family Relations for the Eleanor Grace Foundation. She'd been worth every penny and more, tracking down the remaining families, documenting their stories, preparing for tonight's launch. "Nervous?" she asked. "Terrified." Lucas smiled despite the butterflies in his stomach. "I've given presentations to rooms full of investors without breaking a sweat. But this matters," Sophie finished. "I know." In 3 months, they'd accomplished what Lucas once would have thought impossible. With Amanda's legal expertise and Sophie's tireless dedication, they'd located every single person Eleanor had helped. They'd interviewed them, photographed them, recorded their stories. They'd turned Eleanor's secret acts of kindness into a comprehensive record of compassion. But more than that, they discovered something extraordinary. A pattern. "5 minutes, Mr. Harrington," a stagehand called. Lucas nodded, then turned to Sophie. "Are you sure about this? Once we reveal what we found, there's no going back. Eleanor deserves the truth. All of it." Sophie squeezed his hand. "We're doing the right thing." The lights dimmed. Lucas walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. Giant screens showed photographs of Eleanor, young Eleanor with Lucas in their tiny apartment, professional Eleanor at charity events, candid Eleanor laughing with people whose faces Lucas now knew intimately. He stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. In the front row sat Timothy Chun, now 22 and in medical school. Beside him, Maria Santos, the baker who'd lost her home. James Wright, the first-generation college graduate who is now a resident at Johns Hopkins. And dozens more. Lives Eleanor had touched. Futures she'd saved. "Thank you all for coming," Lucas began, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. 3 months ago, I discovered that my late wife had been living a double life. The audience leaned forward. While I was building a company, Eleanor was building something far more valuable: hope. She helped 43 families during the darkest moments of their lives. She paid medical bills, saved homes, funded educations. She did it anonymously, asking nothing in return, expecting no recognition. The screens changed, showing the faces of Eleanor's families, their stories scrolling beneath their photographs. I thought I was here tonight to announce a foundation in her honor, to continue her work, to turn her secret legacy into a public institution that would help thousands more. Lucas paused. But 3 weeks ago, we discovered something that changed everything. Sophie appeared at his side, carrying a leather-bound journal. Eleanor's journal. We found this in Eleanor's safety deposit box, buried beneath the other documents. We almost missed it. Lucas opened the journal with reverent hands. It's her private record of everyone she helped. But it's more than just names and amounts. He looked directly at the camera broadcasting this event live. Eleanor didn't choose these 43 families randomly. She chose them because of me. The audience stirred with confusion. Lucas turned to the screens, which now showed a new image, a complex web connecting all 43 families to various points in Lucas's life and career. "Timothy Chun," Lucas said, pointing to the web. His father, David, was a software engineer who interviewed at Harrington Technologies 8 years ago. I rejected his application because he didn't have the right pedigree, the right credentials. David took a lower-paying job, which is why his family couldn't afford Timothy's surgery. Gasps rippled through the audience. Maria Santos worked as a cleaning woman in our first office building. I fired the entire cleaning crew when I found a cheaper contractor. Maria struggled for months to find new work, fell behind on her mortgage, and eventually lost her home in a fire because she'd moved to a building with faulty wiring. Lucas's voice cracked, but he continued. "James Wright. His mother applied for a grant from the Harrington Technologies Scholarship Fund. I personally reviewed her application and denied it because James's grades weren't quite high enough, his essay not quite compelling enough. His family couldn't afford college without that grant. The screens showed connection after connection. Every single one of Eleanor's 43 families linked directly to a decision Lucas had made. A person he'd rejected. A cost he'd cut. A corner he'd trimmed in the relentless pursuit of efficiency and profit. Eleanor wasn't just helping random people, Lucas said, tears streaming freely now. She was fixing my mistakes. Every single one of them. The revelation hung in the air, devastating and beautiful. She never told me. Never threw it in my face. She just quietly, methodically, found every person I'd hurt in my climb to success and tried to make it right. Lucas looked down at the journal. Her final entry, written the day before she died, says this. Lucas is a good man who's forgotten how to see people. He sees numbers, efficiency, results. But I remember the man who cried when we had to put our dog to sleep. The man who gave his last $20 to a homeless veteran. The man who stayed up all night helping his neighbor fix her broken heater. That man is still in there. And when I'm gone, I hope he finds these families. I hope he meets them and realizes what I've always known, that success without compassion is just expensive emptiness. I'm leaving him a map back to himself. 43 signposts pointing toward the man he used to be. I'm betting everything that he'll follow them. Lucas closed the journal, looking out at the 43 families, at Sophie with tears running down her face, at the hundreds of witnesses to this confession. I'm standing here tonight to tell you that Eleanor won her bet. His voice was raw with emotion and conviction. I've met every single person she helped. I've heard their stories. I've seen how my choices, my callous, profit-driven choices, damaged their lives. And I've seen how Eleanor's compassion gave them second chances. He stepped away from the podium, walked to the edge of the stage. So tonight, I'm not just announcing a foundation. I'm announcing a fundamental change to how Harrington Technologies operates. Effective immediately, we're establishing a compassionate business initiative. Every hiring decision, every contract negotiation, every cost-cutting measure will be evaluated not just for profit, but for human impact. The audience erupted in applause, but Lucas held up his hand. We're also establishing a review board, made up entirely of Eleanor's families, to audit my decisions and hold me accountable. Because I can't trust myself anymore. I need people who understand what it means to be on the receiving end of corporate indifference. Timothy Chin stood, starting a standing ovation that swept through the entire ballroom. Lucas saw grown men crying, saw Maria Santos holding her hand over her heart, saw James Wright mouthing "thank you" over and over. But it was Sophie's face that undid him completely. She was looking at him like he'd just moved mountains. Like Eleanor was looking at him through her eyes. The Eleanor Grace Foundation will operate with a simple mission, Lucas concluded. We find people that the system has failed. People that corporations, institutions, and individuals like me have overlooked or actively harmed. And we give them what Eleanor gave all of you, a second chance. He paused, gathering himself for the final revelation. We've already begun. In the past 3 months, we've identified 200 more families connected to Harrington Technologies business practices. People laid off in cost-cutting measures who lost homes. People injured by products we rushed to market. People whose communities we disrupted in pursuit of expansion. The screens showed their faces now, a new wave of lives waiting to be changed. Eleanor helped 43 families with $3 million. I'm committing $3 billion to help thousands more. Not because it's good PR. Not because it'll boost stock prices. But because it's what she would have done if she'd had the resources. Because she taught me that the true measure of success isn't what you build, it's who you lift up along the way. The ballroom exploded with applause. Journalists rushed to their cameras. Photographers surged forward. But Lucas only had eyes for one person. Sophie was climbing the stairs to the stage, and when she reached him, she threw her arms around him. Eleanor would be so proud, she whispered in his ear. Lucas held her tight, and for the first time since Eleanor's death, He felt something other than grief when he thought of his wife. He felt gratitude for the map she'd left him, for the lesson she'd taught him, for the love that had been strong enough to survive death and guide him home. Eleanor's legacy wasn't just the 43 families she'd saved. It was the man she'd believed Lucas could become. And he'd finally become him. 1 year later, Lucas stood at Eleanor's grave, a bouquet of wild daisies in his hands. The November wind was cold again, just like it had been that first day, but this time he welcomed it as an old friend rather than a punishment. He wasn't alone. Sophie stood beside him, her arm linked through his. She wore a warm coat now, midnight blue cashmere that he'd given her for Christmas, though she'd protested it was too expensive. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a professional bun. She looked healthy, confident, alive. Behind them, a small crowd had gathered. Timothy Chun and his father David. Maria Santos with her granddaughter. James Wright, who'd just completed his first year of residency. And 37 others. The families Eleanor had saved, the people who'd become Lucas's extended family over the past year. They came together every year now on the anniversary of that first meeting. To honor Eleanor. To celebrate her legacy. To remind themselves of the miracle of second chances. Lucas knelt and placed the daisies against the headstone. Someone had added new words to the marble. Eleanor Grace Harrington. Beloved wife. 1982 to 2014. She saved lives by seeing people. Hello, love, Lucas said softly, like he did every week when he visited. I brought everyone. I thought you'd like that. The wind rustled through the trees, and Lucas chose to believe it was Eleanor's laughter. The foundation hit a milestone yesterday, he continued. 5,000 families helped in 12 months. 5,000 lives changed because of what you started. His voice wavered. We're calling the scholarship program the Eleanor Grace Initiative. Full rides for students whose applications get rejected by traditional metrics. We're betting on potential instead of pedigree. Sophie squeezed his shoulder. Tell her about the other thing. Lucas smiled.
Right.
The other thing. He touched the cold marble. We're opening Eleanor Grace centers in 15 cities. Medical clinics, legal aid, job training, mental health services, all free. All based on your model of seeing people's dignity before their deficits. Timothy stepped forward, kneeling beside Lucas. Mrs. Harrington, I graduated medical school last month. Top of my class. I'm starting my residency at Children's Hospital, specializing in pediatric oncology. His voice broke. Because of you, I get to save kids like me. I get to be someone's miracle. Maria came next, her weathered hands folding over her heart. I opened a bakery, Mija. 3 locations now. And every Saturday, we donate all our bread to homeless shelters. Because you taught us that when we're blessed, we bless others. One by one, Eleanor's families came forward with their updates. James was engaged to a fellow doctor. David Chen had been hired at Harrington Technologies as Senior VP of Product Development. A woman named Patricia Reynolds, the one who'd given Eleanor the cash that started it all, had become a lawyer specializing in workers' rights cases. Every single one of them thriving, growing, paying Eleanor's gift forward. When the last person had spoken, Sophie addressed the gathering. Eleanor never knew most of you. She helped you and disappeared because she didn't need recognition. She needed purpose. Sophie's voice carried across the hillside. But we know you, and we want you to know each other, because that's how we turn Eleanor's secret acts of kindness into a movement. The families began talking among themselves, exchanging phone numbers, making plans. Lucas watched them with a fullness in his chest that he'd forgotten was possible. This was Eleanor's true legacy. Not just the money or the foundation, but the community of people who understood that compassion was a choice, and that every choice created ripples that could change the world. Sophie touched his arm. Can we talk? Just for a minute. They walked a short distance away, to a bench overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. I got an email this morning, Sophie said. From the dean at State University. They're offering me a full scholarship to return and finish my nursing degree. Lucas felt joy and sorrow war in his chest. Sophie, that's incredible. You have to accept. I already did. She smiled. But that's not all. They want me to help design a new program, nursing students who do clinical rotations with the Eleanor Gray Centers, training the next generation of healthcare workers to see patients as people first. Eleanor would love that. I know. Sophie turned to face him fully. Lucas, this past year has been the most amazing of my life. Working with you, building the foundation, meeting all these incredible people, you gave me a purpose I didn't know I could have. You gave me something too, Lucas said. You gave me a reason to stop hiding, to face what I'd lost and what I could still become. Sophie took his hand. Over the past year, their relationship had deepened into something Lucas couldn't quite name. It wasn't romantic, they both knew that. But it was profound. She was part mentor, part daughter, part best friend. She was the living embodiment of Eleanor's faith in redemption. When I go back to school, Sophie said carefully, I'll still work with the foundation. Weekends, breaks, however I can. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't stop living just because I'm not there every day. Her eyes were serious. You've come so far, Lucas. You've transformed yourself, the company, everything. But sometimes I still see you looking at Eleanor's picture with that guilt in your eyes. Lucas looked away, but Sophie gently turned his face back. She forgave you, Sophie said. She forgave you before there was even anything to forgive. That's what the journal showed us. She understood who you were and who you were becoming. She left you the map because she believed in you, not because she was punishing you. Tears pricked Lucas's eyes. I just wish I could tell her I'm sorry, that I finally understand what she was trying to teach me. She knows. Sophie's voice was fierce with certainty. Wherever she is, she knows. And she's so damn proud of you. They sat in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. The families began to disperse, calling goodbyes, making plans for the foundation's next charity gala. Timothy waved as he left. Maria blew them a kiss. Lucas thought about the past year. The board meetings where he'd championed compassionate business practices, even when they cost short-term profits. The nights he'd spent volunteering at Eleanor Gray Centers, serving meals, listening to stories, seeing faces instead of statistics. The day he'd personally apologized to David Chen for rejecting him all those years ago, and the friendship that had grown from that humility. He'd given away $3 billion, and he'd never felt richer. Harrington Technology stock had actually risen. Turned out investors liked companies with souls. But more importantly, Lucas liked who he saw in the mirror now. He liked the man who remembered employees' names, who asked about their families, who measured success in lives improved rather than quarterly earnings. He liked being the man Eleanor had always believed he could be. I need to tell you something, Lucas said suddenly. I've been thinking about this for months, but I wanted to be sure. Sophie waited. I'm stepping down as CEO of Harrington Technologies. Her eyes widened. Lucas. Not retiring. Just transitioning. David Chen is ready to take over. He's brilliant, and he understands the company's new direction. Lucas smiled. I'm going to run the Eleanor Grace Foundation full-time. That's where I'm needed. That's where I want to be. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He stood, pulling Sophie up with him. Eleanor spent her final years saving people. I want to spend the rest of mine doing the same thing. Not as penance, but as purpose. Sophie threw her arms around him, and Lucas held her tight, this young woman who'd appeared at a gravestone and changed everything. They walked back to Eleanor's grave together. The sun had fully set now, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Lucas knelt one more time, placing his hand on the cold marble. I'm okay now, love, he whispered. It took me a while, but I'm okay. I found the man you were looking for. And I promise I won't lose him again. The wind picked up, swirling the daisies he'd brought, and for just a moment, Lucas could swear he smelled Eleanor's perfume. Lavender and hope. Sophie offered her hand, and Lucas took it, letting her pull him to his feet. As they walked toward the cemetery gates, Lucas looked back one more time. The headstone stood proud in the fading light, a monument not just to Eleanor's death, but to her life, to her vision, to her unshakable belief that people were worth saving. All people, even broken billionaires who'd forgotten how to see. Underscore 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 underscore. 6 months later, Sophie stood at the front of a classroom at State University, 25 nursing students watching her with rapt attention. Patient care isn't just about vital signs and medications, she told them. It's about seeing the whole person, their fears, their hopes, their dignity. She clicked to a new slide, a photograph of a 9-year-old girl in a hospital bed, bald from chemotherapy, but smiling. This was me 15 years ago. I was dying, and my mother had no way to save me. Then a woman I'd never met walked into that hospital and saw me. Not my disease. Not my poverty.
Me.
Sophie's voice grew stronger. That woman was Eleanor Grace Harrington. And she taught me that every patient is someone's daughter, someone's father, someone's whole world. When you remember that, when you really see people, you don't just treat illnesses. You restore hope. The students leaned forward, hanging on every word. After class, Sophie checked her phone. A text from Lucas. Eleanor Grace Center in Detroit just opened. Served 200 families on day 1. Maria's Bakery donated all the food. Timothy's helping set up the medical wing. Wish you were here, but I know you're exactly where you should be. Proud of you. Sophie smiled, typing back. Proud of you too. Eleanor's smiling. I can feel it. She gathered her books and headed across campus, where a study group was waiting. Her life was full now: school, foundation work, friendships, purpose. She'd started dating a fellow nursing student, someone kind who made her laugh. She was healing from her mother's loss, building a future that honored both the women who'd saved her. But every Sunday, she still visited Eleanor's grave, brought daisies, said thank you. Some debts could never be repaid, only paid forward.
Present day.
Lucas stood on stage at the annual Eleanor Grace Foundation Gala, looking out at a ballroom filled with 3,000 people. The foundation had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. 25 Eleanor Grace centers across the country, over 15,000 families helped, hundreds of scholarships awarded. But his favorite part was always the same. I'd like to invite some special guests to the stage, Lucas said. Timothy Chin walked out first, now an attending physician already being recognized nationally for his work in pediatric oncology. Then Maria Santos, whose bakery empire now employed 50 people, most of them formerly homeless. James Wright, who'd just been named chief resident at Johns Hopkins. And 37 others. Eleanor's original 43 families, minus the 6 who'd passed away naturally over the years. They stood together, a living testament to what one woman's compassion had begun. These people are the reason we're here, Lucas said. My late wife saw them when the world looked away. She helped them when the system failed them. And they've taken that gift and multiplied it 1,000 times over. He paused, looking at each face, faces he now knew as well as his own. But the person I want to honor tonight isn't here. Sophie Dawson couldn't make it because she's delivering her first baby as a newly certified labor and delivery nurse. The crowd erupted in applause. Lucas pulled out his phone, showing a photo Sophie had texted him an hour ago, her in scrubs, exhausted and elated, holding a newborn. Her message read, "It's a girl. Parents are naming her Eleanor." Full circle, Lucas. Full circle. Lucas's eyes filled with tears as the audience cheered. He looked up at the ceiling, past it, to wherever Eleanor was. "We did it, love," he whispered. "We turned your 43 miracles into a movement." The gala continued late into the night, dancing, celebrating, donors writing checks that would change thousands more lives. But Lucas slipped away early, driven by a need he couldn't quite explain. An hour later, He stood at Eleanor's grave under a full moon. He placed fresh daisies on the marble, then did something he hadn't done before. He sat down on the ground, his back against the headstone, and just talked. He told her about the Foundation's latest projects, about Sophie's graduation and her first day as a nurse, about David Chen's innovative leadership at Harrington Technologies, about the lives saved, the futures restored, the hope multiplied. He told her about his own life, simpler now, richer in ways that had nothing to do with money. He'd sold the penthouse, bought a modest house near Eleanor Grace Center 1. He volunteered 3 days a week, served meals, listened to stories, saw people. He'd even adopted a dog, a scrappy rescue mutt that Eleanor would have adored. "I'm happy," he said out loud, and realized with wonder that it was true. "For the first time since you died, I'm actually happy. Not because I've forgotten you, but because I'm finally living the way you always hoped I would." The wind rustled through the trees, gentle and warm despite the November chill. "Thank you," Lucas whispered. "Thank you for the map. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for loving me enough to show me what really matters." He stood, brushing off his pants, and placed one hand on the headstone. "I'll see you next week, love. Same time, same place. I've got stories about a kid named Jordan who reminds me so much of Timothy, brilliant but stuck in a broken system. We're getting him into MIT." Lucas smiled. "You would have loved him." As he walked back to his car, Lucas felt a peace he'd been chasing for 11 years. Eleanor was gone, but her legacy was alive in every person the Foundation helped, every life the Eleanor Grace Centers touched, every heart that learned to see people instead of problems. She'd saved 43 families. And in doing so, she'd saved him too. Lucas drove home through the quiet streets, past the Eleanor Grace Center, where lights still burned, volunteers working late, helping the people who needed it most. His phone buzzed. A message from Sophie. "Baby Eleanor and Mom are doing great. Dad says they want to meet you tomorrow. Bring daisies. Red heart." Lucas smiled, typing back. "Wild or store-bought?" "Wild, obviously." Eleanor would insist. Yes, she would. Eleanor always had insisted on authenticity over convenience, on meaning over money, on people over profit. And finally, Lucas had learned the lesson. He pulled into his driveway, where his rescue dog was waiting at the window. Inside, his home was warm and welcoming, filled with photographs of Eleanor's families, thank you letters from scholarship recipients, drawings from children who'd been treated at the centers. A life that mattered. A legacy worth living. Lucas had spent 10 years running from his grief, and 1 year running toward his purpose. In the end, Eleanor's greatest gift wasn't the money she'd left him, or even the families she'd saved. It was the map she'd drawn, pointing him back to the man he'd forgotten he could be. And he'd followed it all the way home. Thank you for taking this journey with Lucas, Sophie, and Eleanor. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear about second chances and the power of compassion. Drop a comment telling me what Eleanor's legacy means to you. I read every single one, and your words inspire the stories I tell.